Our story begins with the presentation of a map where the recommended level to enter was at least level 10, falling within the 3-star recommendation index. The map, named East Suburb, the Forest of Giants, was founded thanks to abundant rains that created those giant trees. Its abundance of wood and enormous fruits were the main source of income for the region's inhabitants. However, as the forest was gradually being explored, huge silhouettes began to be frequently seen moving in the depths of the forest. Within this grand forest, a boy with the ID of Road King was about to face an elite boss named Ah Meng with only one arm, where the boss kept trying to intimidate his opponent so they could finally fight, and the player could demonstrate his courage to face him once and for all instead of just trying to lower his status that way. With the battle truly continuing, the boy continued preparing for the boss's final blow, which raised his weapon ready to kill him, this being the boss's last strike. The strike named Crossed Avalanche made the ground crack upon impact, but the player skillfully dodged while advancing against the boss again, despite the speed of his attack being reduced by 30% for 5 seconds. Using the Crossed Swords move, his attack was able to hit the boss. He made those movement calculations from the beginning, thinking about how he had to jump to dodge the attack half a second before he could be hit by the boss, then using the miss to approach and also using a combination of the note with the Crossed Swords move, all calculated at such a speed that made him feel like a true unique and unmatched genius on the battlefield. The game system warned him of being able to defeat the elite boss, immediately receiving the boss's weapon called Ah Meng's Heavy Sword, which required at least level 15 to use. Still, it had a high-level attribute that reduced the user's level by 5, which was actually a great luck for the player because that was the first type of weapon he could get on his first day of playing. Thanks to this, he knew he could climb the level rankings and battle rankings. With that, a small elven assistant appears to congratulate the player for winning, and also for obtaining powerful equipment as a consequence of the victory. He asks if there was any news, and the assistant says that a limited-time event had started, asking if the Road King wished to participate in it, which the event was named the Blood Moon Wanderer. And in this event, a boss would be launched that would be available for a limited time in the Forest of Giants, this being the Blood Moon Wanderer. Those who were able to defeat him would obtain rare equipment and a huge amount of experience, to which the player immediately accepts while thinking that a limited-time boss should be a bit difficult to face, but it was still a good opportunity to test his new sword. On the map, the assistant warns the Road King that several players were moving towards the boss, so they would need to increase their speed to arrive before the others, so they couldn't make the first move, and he agrees because all they had been seeing lately were just trees, and that was making him a bit tired. Suddenly, a purple light begins to appear from within the forest, making him realize it was a purple equipment exploding, which even if it couldn't be used by swordsmen, it should still be worth thousands of dollars if sold for the right price. He then hurries his steps to reach that equipment as quickly as possible, but upon arriving, he realizes it would be difficult to know which one it was because there were too many pieces of equipment around. It doesn't take long for the Road King to find the gold mine he's been searching for so much, still boasting about being a true male protagonist in that world, until suddenly a blow cuts his neck to the point where he couldn't even see what happened. The player is completely shocked because he ended up being killed by none other than the boss of the limited time called the Blood Moon Wanderer, who was also audacious enough to keep track of the dead. More and more eager people to get the equipment start to appear, anxious to defeat the boss even though there's only a minute left for that event to end. Each of them is killed in sequence, until eventually the players think of uniting to defeat that boss. They form teams and plan with each one, sending archers and mages to attack from a distance to restrict the boss's movements, while flesh shields and fighters pull aggro and withstand damage. They were convinced they could finish off the boss quickly because they were in greater numbers, and as soon as the boss was eliminated, they could take all the equipment left behind. But despite their planning, that boss was too powerful and continued killing each one of them without stopping for a single moment, being the epitome of hunting enemies, killing without any mercy. The other players realize he wasn't a boss that could be easily defeated and begin to retreat out of fear of being defeated in the same way as the others who advanced against him. Still, even those who were trying their best to escape while pretending not to have anything to do with that event were being actively killed, with the boss still claiming that there were still few people who were killed by his hands. In parallel, the Road King's assistant says that he shouldn't be discouraged because there is still a huge amount of experience and rare equipment waiting for them in the future. After this moment, we then meet our protagonist in the real world who was talking to his boss. Our protagonist's name was Lu Lai, and he was listening to his boss saying that he was disappointed with him because with his skills he could have obtained a shareholding in the company that year and become a shareholder of the Destiny Corporation, thus having an unlimited and successful future. But still, he chose to invest in a case of missing persons, thus harming the interests and reputation of the company, so according to the board's decisions, Lu Lai was fired. Despite being fired, Lu Lai had nothing to say in response, being a former game development director of Destiny, a high-level data analyst, and master in computer science. Lu Lai says that if that was all his boss wanted to tell him, then he was leaving for the dismissal process, which makes his boss sigh because that was a waste of talent. Then he tells his secretary named Wang to find a replacement for Lu Lai, or else add another 20 million to his compensation package. But despite his boss saying that, Wang was visibly shaken because Lu Lai left the company, mainly because she had only taken that position because she wanted to see Lu Lai a few times every day, and now that he had left, she was considering resigning too. After leaving the Destiny Company, Lu Lai thinks about how he now had some clue about his brother's disappearance, and with that, he could finally advance in his search to find him. On the way home, Lu Lai realizes that he's lost because he was a workaholic and only went home once every 2 years, also having a terrible sense of direction and couldn't even distinguish north or south without getting completely lost. In other words, the Zorro of this manhwa. Meanwhile, a woman named Azi was furious with life, arguing with a boy named Fei because he was a real scoundrel who kept calling her treasure every time, but she ended up discovering that on his phone there were almost 70 contacts with the same nickname of treasure, which obviously made her angry to know what kind of thing he was up to. Despite Fei insisting he could explain, Ozzy says she didn't even want to hear his apologies because he was always lying, so she would break up with him right now and never wanted to see him in her life again. Lu Lai ends up seeing Ozzy leaving crying from the place before seeing Fei begging her to listen to him, and the guy even had the nerve to say that she alongside the other girls were all treasures in his heart, which makes Lu Lai make a bitter expression with the words he heard. Fei soon recognizes his brother and greets him because he always comes at the right times, but that wasn't exactly how Lu Lai felt after seeing that whole scene with his brother's ex-girlfriend, but Fei says it wasn't anything important because everything would be fine in a few days. The two enter Fei's house and he begins to offer his brother some drinks, and Lu Lai immediately comments that he should be careful about his household hygiene when living alone so that no one would feel embarrassed there, and also needed to start having some control in his personal life. But despite Fei agreeing with him, it was clear to Lu Lai that he wasn't at all concerned about following his advice, telling Lu Lai to just stay with him for a few more days because he always left in a hurry. Lu Lai agrees with his words, to which Fei becomes super happy with his words and suggests they could even prepare a barbecue that night. But then he remembers that his older brother was probably tired from work and even proposes to take him for a very pleasant massage, but in the middle of the conversation, Lu Lai mentions that he had discovered a clue about the disappearance of his older brother, kind of breaking the pleasant atmosphere between them. Fei becomes more serious and says that he prepared all the equipment that Lu Lai asked for, and at midnight it would be the official launch time of the game called Fantasy Moon by the Destiny Corporation. And with that, they could discover more information about the disappearance of his older brother, because, according to Lu Lai, he was somehow connected to that game. And so, when the time finally arrives at midnight, the two brothers prepare with their equipment to enter the game, where the system begins to confirm their identities, allowing both to enter the game and thus thanking them for starting their journey within Fantasy Moon. The assistant soon appears to greet Lu Lai, introducing herself as CC, stating that the game was about to begin, also wishing him a happy journey within that virtual reality world. The system begins to confirm if all things were properly connected, loading the data, configuring that the neurons, sensory system and vision correction were connected and in progress, loading the scene and rendering the light data so that they could finally create their characters within the game. The two enter Fantasy Moon and start within the beginner's village of Moblin. Entering the game still at level 1, Lu Lai realizes that the optimization of the neural connection was good and the sensations of the game, such as temperature and humidity, were quite realistic as well. It doesn't take long for Faye to log in, and he soon finds a friend named Amy and says that they would do missions together. But it was obvious to Lu Lai that it wasn't just that, telling his younger brother to go first. Faye is confused by the suggestion and asks if Lu Lai wouldn't join them because the missions for newcomers were always the same for all players, to which Lu Lai says that they took different paths and he had other tasks to do, so Faye should just level up quickly, which continues to confuse Faye despite not insisting on the subject, and both finally go their separate ways. Lu Lai calls his assistant and asks her to open the special redemption code window. And with that, the system asks him to enter the redemption code, so typing it, the system perfectly loads the password and states that he had 3 unread emails to check. CC asks what those 3 emails should be because she couldn't recognize them, and Lu Lai affirms that they were the cheats he himself had developed, leaving the assistant shocked because they strictly condemned those who used that kind of thing, asking him to stop using them or he could have his account permanently banned. Lu Lai says that those things were hidden between the lines of the system, so they couldn't detect them, and even if someone could manually search for them, it would take at least half a year to finally find them, so being banned was almost impossible. Within the emails, the first thing he received was an omniscient bracelet that could only be worn starting from level 10, giving an additional 5 points to all attributes and improving its level according to the player character's level, where every 10 levels the equipment's quality could be enhanced. Regarding attribute enhancement, whenever the equipment quality was upgraded, one could randomly obtain a specific profession skill. Equipping it, Lu Lai asks CC to help him hide that equipment, to which the assistant says that it was a cool equipment and didn't understand why he was trying to hide it, and Lu Lai replies that it was too flashy and preferred it to be discreet in appearance. Next, the second email gave him an item called Random Achievements, where every 10 levels it would generate random achievements based on character events, and upon completing them, it could also generate random rewards. Lu Lai becomes worried because he had only entered a command for a powerful item, but apparently the rest had been randomly generated by the AI, and CC says that it still seemed to be a very interesting item to be used. Finally, he receives an invitation from Chen from Asura, which was the most important item Lu Lai had spent 2 years at Destiny just to get it. His older brother had obtained that item during the closed beta, being that a secret story and could be related to the cause of his older brother's disappearance. Therefore, if something happened to Lu Lai in the future, his clues would end there, but still, he couldn't let his brother Faye face any danger again. In the Purgatory Asura invitation scroll, there was a description of the method of the Asura in which one couldn't obey the heavens or the earth or all things, but must follow their own heart seeking only their true self. Those who obstruct their true self would perish, those who defy their true self would perish. Therefore, one should eliminate all obstacles, everything that could appear before their eyes. With that, the system asks if Lu Lai wished to change his profession to Asura, and warns him that this would trigger a new storyline after specialization. Lu Lai confirms without any hesitation, to which he begins to feel a terrible pain in his heart to the point of beginning to see some creatures around him wearing a dark cloak resembling dark skulls, and thus the game begins to describe the resurgence of Nirvana from its beginning. and so all those killer creatures pierce Lu Lai's body at the same time. He tries to think about what was happening, confused because he didn't know that storyline had been designed, seeming like a real pain, almost too real. The system begins to detect that his character had died, receiving an error message because the characters in that area couldn't be attacked, failing several times to restart. Lu Lai begins to fall into a kind of limbo, not understanding where he was or what was happening, being too dark to even see, and he begins to hope that the game just hadn't crashed, and begins to ask the system to let him out. Still, the system warns again that there was an error code, where his data source code was not detected, so it was impossible to exit the game. Lu Lai is shocked to have been unable to leave the game, because the exit command should be forcibly executed, wondering how that could be happening, insisting for the system to fix the error code and to respond to him. After pleading several times, Lu Lai's character now awakens in a skull-like form just like those creatures that previously stabbed him, wondering if the system had finally been restored. Lu Lai is surprised because apparently he had turned into a skeleton, confused because he should be an asura in reality, and still not understanding why he had been sent to a place he had never seen before. Before him, a man appears insisting for his servant to awaken, believing that Lu Lai was his summon, he being an epic level boss called Rain, the undead summoner of level 30. Lu Lai becomes curious because that man was evidently an NPC and tries to dialogue with him, leaving Rain in shock because his undead was still able to speak, wondering if he ended up summoning a high-quality skeleton guard. Lu Lai thinks that if the boss didn't respond, it probably should be a beginner-level NPC and starts walking, thinking he could ask someone else, leaving Rain puzzled as to why the undead was just leaving, making him realize that it shouldn't be a very obedient summon, realizing that undead probably still thought it was a human. Then he starts using his powers to trap Lu Lai with chains, and Rain says he was just teaching Lu Lai to be an obedient dog, making the protagonist wonder if that guy was really a beginner boss as he had theorized. Lu Lai says he was actually just level 1 and didn't even have any skills, wondering who had created that whole scenario. But before anything could happen, out of nowhere, Lu Lai's body starts flying out and hits a cross, realizing that suddenly a character named the Great Saru appeared, and he was actually gigantic, making Lu Lai realize that it was simply exaggerated too much for just a game, wondering if he had entered the wrong map and how he could play while being at such a low level when those NPCs and monsters were clearly much more powerful than him. Lu Lai calls his assistant, and she immediately praises his new appearance, but he just asks where he was now, to which CC responds that the area he was in was known as the Realm of Pure Darkness. That was the birthplace of all advanced bosses in the Fantasy Moon game, and also the most dangerous area with the highest danger level. Lu Lai asks how he should proceed with the game and if there wouldn't be any place to do missions, and CC starts looking for him, and she manages to find a mission point 100 kilometers away from him, asking the character to follow her. Lu Lai starts following the assistant, asking if they couldn't just take a normal route instead of starting to climb a hill, and CC says that was precisely the shortest route of all, and if they took a detour, there would be 400 more kilometers to go. Lu Lai continues to be shocked because the entire path they pass was visibly dangerous with the amount of monsters surrounding and chasing them. But the assistant insists they should just continue and even asks if he wanted her to play some background music to give him positivity, but he declines immediately because clearly that wasn't the problem. Suddenly, the assistant warns him that he had a message from Faye, and he says that he had killed 20 wild boars for the main mission, which was exhausting, but he reached level 5 and even got a green staff in the process, which makes Lu Lai comment that it wasn't bad at all. Faye asks what his brother had been doing in the meantime, and if he had been able to level up secretly exploring dungeons with lots of experience and good equipment. But when Lu Lai says he was actually still at level 1, Faye gets confused because that didn't seem at all like what his brother would usually do, then encourages him to continue improving because although it was tiring, he could keep going. Lu Lai ends the conversation right there saying he was busy and needed to leave. After all, in the meantime, the assistant was warning the player that they should hurry up, because they were about to be caught by the monster behind them, something that was quite obvious even to the blind. After a long journey that almost killed his characters several times, CC warns that they were very close now, finally getting close to the place where they could get the mission. But to Lu Lai's surprise, there was a long line to get in, and the assistant states that it would take at least 2 hours for them to be attended to. Lu Lai then realizes that there was another entrance with few people waiting, and CC says that actually wasn't the planned route, but he simply says it didn't matter as long as they could enter the city because his assistant's routes were always too complicated, saying she could step back for now. Lu Lai approaches the empty entrance guarded by 2 monsters who ask what he intended to do trying to enter through there, and he explains that he had an urgent matter and asks if they could make an exception for him this time, and the guard scoffs because people always had urgent matters and wanted to pass at once. But still, the 2 guards let him pass even though Lu Lai didn't understand the irony in their voices. The 2 guards laugh at the situation, saying it was impressive that he even thanked for entering, and from there they could enter and see how those players would die in the most miserable way possible. With that, the system announces that the registration period for the event at the Fengyan Tower had ended. Lu Lai continues to enter the tower, thinking he had finally arrived where he wanted. But suddenly an NPC who seemed to be some sort of host announces that the last competitor had just arrived and begins to analyze the basic information of that participant, being surprised because he was still at level 1. And thus all the people in the audience start mocking him for entering that competition when he hadn't even left the basic level. The host laughs, saying that maybe this time the cannon fodder participant could actually bring some interesting twists to the competition, and asks everyone to be quiet because everyone should be eager to start the competition, and thus finally announces the beginning of the battle at the Storm Cloud Arena. The people in the audience continue to celebrate that the battle would finally begin, and the host continues to say that the comments and presentation of that event were still being conducted by him, the quick-tongued rabbit, and the turtle beside him, and without letting his companion speak, the rabbit continues to affirm that despite everyone being used to hearing that, he still needed to remind everyone about the battle rules as tradition dictated. The rules of the Storm Cloud Arena began with the explanation that the matches would be conducted in an individual arena battle format per day, with only a single winner at the end. To ensure impartiality, the levels of all participants would be adjusted to the level of the lowest level participant, not being below level 10. Only skills within the adjusted level could be used, and the equipment would be provided by the Storm Cloud Arena to be used. Lastly, except for the opponent's surrender, the only criterion for a participant's victory was to kill. As for the rewards, the winner of this Storm Cloud Arena would receive 5,000 experience points and an epic weapon corresponding to their level. After explaining the rules, the rabbit states that they would start adjusting the levels of all participants, and that would be the lowest level event in the history of the Storm Arena, and everyone was set at level 10 due to the presence of Lu Lai's character. The participants begin to complain because now there were few skills left to be used, others because they couldn't even use the special move they just learned, and wanting to take revenge on the skeleton that entered the competition for missing the opportunity to use their best techniques, and mocking Lu Lai for supposedly thinking that being at the same level would compensate for the difference in experience and battle skills. After all that, Lu Lai was more than regretful for not listening to what CC said about just waiting in line as she said because he clearly entered through the wrong door. Despite that, the system congratulated him for reaching level 10 temporarily, allowing him to choose his initial class, making him start to think about which one to choose. He remembers when he used to play with his older brother, he always said it was suitable to play as an assassin. With that, Lu Lai chooses Assassin as his class, and the rabbit host continues to say that the participants should hurry to adapt to the adjusted levels because time waited for no one, so they could finally start distributing their equipment to all participants. With that, Lu Lai receives the temporary equipment, which was a sharp dagger, which makes him think it wouldn't be so bad to try something like that. If he couldn't win, he could surrender right away, which shouldn't be a problem. Thus, the host says they could finally get to the climax of the Storm Cloud Arena, welcoming the Dream Mentor, the special guest for that competition. In this competition, those players who performed exceptionally well could have the chance to be protected by him, while the person to his left was the famous Lord Zhuang Huaishui from the Blood Moon City. Zhuang was the Lord of the Moon Hall in the north of Blood Moon City, responsible for external war and strategic planning in the Blood Moon City. The presenter continues to talk about how half of the power of the Blood Moon City came from Lord Zhuang's North Moon Hall, and 70% of the experts of the young generation were disciples of Lord Zhuang. Thus, if someone managed to catch his attention, it could truly be a great honor, presenting a chance for them to shine and a step towards reaching new heights in life. With that, several people start clamoring for Zhuang's name, saying they were fans of his, asking if he was accepting concubines, and begging to have his attention only for them. Some even went as far as to claim they were lost children just to receive his attention, the courage of millions. And to the right of Lord Zhuang, there was the #1 beauty of the Blood Moon City, Wu Yu, being the lady of the East Moon Hall in the Blood Moon City responsible for managing resource allocation and the blood reservoir. Yu was truly beautiful and prosperous, described as having an unfathomable form, but also having very strict criteria for selecting her disciples, and so far she had only selected one person as her disciple. Still, what they said mattered was the quality and not the quantity, and so her disciple was Han Yixiao, the incomparable genius who achieved 10 consecutive victories in the Storm Cloud Arena, shaking the Blood Moon City. Unlike when they began begging Zhuang to pay attention to them, people begin to comment that they shouldn't make noise because Yu had a violent temper, and if she didn't like someone, she could kill them without hesitation. Others insist that those rumors were true because they heard about it in the streets, where someone had looked at Yu and their eyes were gouged out, and then their body was torn apart and fed to the hellhounds. And yet, a guard even tried to scream Yu's name and had his tongue ripped out, so she was definitely not someone who should even consider being provoked. But among everything the presenter said, what caught Lu Lai's attention was the name Han Yixiao, being his older brother, leaving him happy because he finally got an even better clue about his whereabouts. Knowing that woman called Yu should know something, he would have to find a way to get close to her. Meanwhile, Yu thinks to herself how Lu Lai dares to look directly at her, and whether she should just crush him to death. But instead of actually doing that, she stops and thinks better because Zhuang was right by her side, and she didn't know how he would handle the situation if she really made a mess so early in the competition, making her begin to consider whether she should just kill Zhuang as well. That said, the rabbit presenter says that now that the introductions had been almost completed, they wonder who could be the winner to receive the abundant rewards and extraordinary opportunities at the end of that competition. So, to provide a better experience for everyone and for the audience, he would provide real-time comments to help create a better atmosphere. Firstly, they should take a look at the first match, and as expected, the first to enter the Storm Cloud Arena was Blood Claw from the Blood Lion clan. Since Blood Claw was born with an extraordinary blood lineage, the Blood Lion clan naturally excelled. Blood Claw was the representative of the new generation of the Blood Battle Lion clan. Additionally, his claws were invincible and incredibly sharp, widely recognized as the best player in that competition. Blood Claw defeats his opponent with just one blow in a KO, thus securing his victory with overwhelming dominance. So, the next competitor was the zombie swordsman Bei Lei from the Great Sword Sect. The Great Sword Sect was a newly emerged faction in the Southern Moon Hall, where Bei Lei was the vice leader of the Great Sword Sect and was considered quite famous in the Southern Moon Hall. His sword was fast, precise, and relentless, and countless experts fell under his sword. Bei Lei managed to quickly and easily defeat his opponent. The third winner was the dual-wielding demon named Jer, who came from a distant wilderness and fought his way to the Blood Moon City. His strength should not be underestimated. The fourth victorious participant, to everyone's surprise, was Lu Lai, and no one could believe how that was possible. Still, it was truly impressive that he had come so far, and so they would quickly begin the most exciting and thrilling second round. the quarterfinals of the Storm Cloud Arena. Therefore, the first battle would be between Lu Lai and Jer, with Lu Lai's opponent immediately ordering him to surrender because he didn't like killing weaklings like him and warning Lu Lai that he wasn't even qualified to force him to act. Meanwhile, Fei continued facing monsters on his way and gaining more levels and fans, with the two girls who were his companions praising him because they were able to defeat all the goblins in the area they were in, and even though a huge number of them had tried to trap them, none of those monsters were able to touch them. Fei just kept having a lot of fun while laughing, saying it was just basic knowledge and not even worth mentioning how he managed to do all that. And his two companions insisted on knowing if he was a professional player or something. Fei just said they could see something even more impressive when they saw his older brother because he was truly unbelievable, and he still wondered how Lu Lai should be now. Back to the battlefield, the presenter says that despite everything, Lu Lai seemed to have some courage to face his opponent and still didn't seem to have lost the will to win. Jer continues speaking, saying that Lu Lai lost the only chance he had to survive, but he didn't need to worry because he would provide him with a good fight. The presenter begins to introduce Jer's lightning attack, which was so fast that it seemed like a blur to his opponent's eyes, but impressively Lu Lai was able to dodge the blow, to which Jer believes it was just a stroke of luck. Still, Lu Lai continues narrowly dodging Jer's attacks, despite his quite persistent strikes. The presenter continues narrating that it was impressive that Lu Lai continued dodging his opponent's attacks for so long, especially after Jer's charged attack, wondering how that could have happened. Lu Lai continues his mental calculations about his opponent, about how Jer should have an estimated arm length of 80 centimeters, and the length of the blade of his enemy's weapon was 100 centimeters, with a handle length of about 20 centimeters, subtracting the contact length with the palm of the hand and adding the arm length, the maximum length of the enemy's strike should be less than 200 centimeters. Therefore, 200 centimeters was smaller than his distance, and as long as he kept that space, the probability of being hit was quite low, but he still needed to be alert to low-probability events like weapon throwing or long-range abilities. Lu Lai continues with his unbelievable calculations, as the enemy's skill had a casting time of half a second. The flight speed of his ability was about 160 kilometers per hour, not difficult to dodge with his reaction speed. Now that he had been able to create some distance, the opponent's next move should probably be the so-called lightning strike, which was a skill with a straight line strike in which during the forward movement would make Jer immobilized for a brief moment. Therefore, if he took advantage of that small period of time, he could win. With Lu Lai, who should be just a player who would quickly lose to any of the opponents there within the competition, the people watching began to mock him for being unable to land a mere blow on a newcomer who was just a level 1 skeleton. Jer obviously starts to become enraged by that humiliation because it should be only a stroke of luck for his opponent to pass through all of his blows in that way, promising that in his next blow he could finally defeat him with just one strike. Chadat. Continuing to calculate his moves, Lu Lai moves 80 centimeters to the left and crouches down 60 centimeters, with the critical strike ability activated. With this, Lu Lai manages to dodge his opponent's blow and immediately kill Jer, leaving him in shock as to how he could die at the hands of such a low-level guy and still be unable to become the Lord of Forgetfulness. The match ends, and the presenter, still impressed with Lu Lai's performance, announces his victory to the audience, even though he himself couldn't believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. Therefore, they wonder if that competitor who should have been a mere joke was actually hiding his true strength from the beginning, and maybe he had an interesting skill in his hands. He continues to affirm that they could only continue to cheer for Lu Lai to keep showing his skills, eagerly awaiting his performance in the upcoming matches. Lord Zhuang becomes interested in that skeleton, asking Yu for her opinion about him, and she replies that he seemed only a little smarter than usual, but nothing really special. But despite that, Zhuang thinks about how that strange competitor was keeping him from getting bored, so he could reward him with a little more time, agreeing out loud with Yu because that inferior lineage could only be useless, being that race in question, the skeletons. The presenter continues to tell the people in the audience to calm down, because despite the last match being quite interesting, the most thrilling confrontation of that storm cloud arena was still to come, being the battle to find the true champion. Thus, we have the battle between Blood Claw and Bei Lei, with Blood Claw telling his opponent that deep down he knew he wasn't a match for him, and Bei Lei responds that indeed his lineage was really inferior to his, but as long as he had a sword in hand, he could be relentless and nothing would stop him. The presenter continues to describe the battle when Bei Lei launched a combined move, using the flowing water strike with a lightning strike, this move being at least 5 times faster than Jair's lightning strike, about to cut Blood Claw's head off at any moment. But despite that blow being about to kill Blood Claw, Bei Lei's sword is bitten and broken into mere pieces with the lion's fangs, leaving Bei Lei totally shocked by what he just saw. And as he dashed his opponent's hopes of winning in any possible way, Blood Claw uses his ability called Explosive Fury Claw that rips Bei Lei apart with his claws in a cruel way, making him fall dead on the ground all shredded. Upon winning, Blood Claw sighs, mocking Bei Lei because he thought he heard his opponent say he had some strength, but in the end, he was just any trash that didn't deserve his attention. The presenter shouts in shock because Blood Claw was truly powerful, and thus the expected Bei Lei was defeated in an instant and with a single blow, being just another KO. The people in the audience start cheering for Blood Claw's name in celebration, and Zhuang comments that the lion wasn't too bad and his lineage was pure enough to have some cultivation value, and Yu just retorts saying she wouldn't even let that lion stand guard at her gate despite that. Lu Lai is equally surprised because Blood Claw unexpectedly started breaking someone's weapon with ease, and he reflects on it because the distributed weapons were supposed to be made uniformly, not to be destroyed so easily. Or it should be the case, but the answer to that question could simply be that even if the lion was reduced to level 10, his basic attributes should still far exceed the expected average level. Blood Claw turns to Lu Lai, finding it very brave of him to appear in front of him again because he hadn't had enough fun yet, ordering the skeleton to come closer while commenting that he had won before in a spectacular way, and if he really had any courage, he should just approach Blood Claw right now. Lu Lai continues to think that if his analysis was correct, the truth was that he didn't have great chances of winning, but the only way to get close to Yu and get information about his brother was by winning that battle. The presenter comments that Lu Lai surpassed himself that day, and therefore he wouldn't need to feel any shame in avoiding the final fight and being the number 2 in that tournament. In fact, he should feel honored to be second and still alive even after all those who were killed or disqualified, but Yu thinks it would be really boring if Lu Lai didn't accept that final challenge, not being able to disappoint her at that moment. And Lu Lai himself thinks that if he gave up now in the face of that difficult task, he couldn't even face his older brother after all that effort to reach that moment. His older and younger brothers were his only family in that world and were the most important things in the world to him, more than his miserable life, so no matter how difficult the path ahead was, nothing could stop him. As Lu Lai approaches Blood Claw, the lion starts laughing because really inferior life forms had pretty stupid brains to think they could face him after a mere small provocation like that. Therefore, he would be his little gift before finally savoring his complete victory, wanting to see his despair, anger, and regret before being able to win that competition. But Lu Lai just says he talks too much, and they should just start fighting already. Lu Lai advances against his opponent, and Blood Claw comments that his speed didn't even come close to the swordsman he faced a short time ago, being much slower. Still, Lu Lai doesn't stop and tries to cut the lion from behind, to which Blood Claw quickly dodges, being impressed because he suddenly got faster, and he almost forgot that Lu Lai was actually from the assassin class, which made him think that until then that skeleton had been holding back. Blood Claw then tries to strike his opponent and sends Lu Lai back, which makes him think the lion was really very strong, but still his speed wasn't at a disadvantage in that battle, even though Blood Claw's stats were much higher than his. Although continuing to underestimate Lu Lai as if he were a mere fly in the trash, he is surprised to see that his face was cut, wondering when and how that happened, immediately mentally cursing his opponent because he was going through that humiliation in front of so many people, being he, the great Blood Claw, a noble class of the Berserk Lion tribe and leader of his strongest generation, being wounded by a mere skeleton like him was simply revolting to him. With that, the lion activates his passive ability called Blood Bath, which increased his speed, power, and critical damage by 20%, thus promising to kill Lu Lai in the most humiliating way possible. The presenter narrates how unimaginable it was that the competitor Lu Lai not only survived exchanging blows with Blood Claw, but was also able to injure him. Zhuang and Yu become even more interested in the battle unfolding before their eyes, finding it impressive because Lu Lai's level and lineage were both at the lowest levels, yet he still reached that point. The narrator continues to talk that Blood Claw seemed extremely irritated, seeming like they were about to enter the climax of that combat. The lion starts to mock Lu Lai for thinking his speed was a reason to be proud, and therefore he would defeat him in his speed game, quickly advancing against Lu Lai and starting to exchange blows against his dagger until the skeleton ended up losing his balance, which makes Blood Claw want to take advantage of that opportunity to deliver the final blow, and still mocking and cursing him to the end when he jumps on him. Lu Lai then responds that he had actually pretended everything because he was waiting for that move. After all, that attack could be powerful. But the casting time was half a second, and also, before the lion could finish that attack, Blood Claw couldn't turn around to see the final blow that Lu Lai intended to deliver. But despite that, Blood Claw laughs at how much he dedicated himself to it, and says that it still wasn't enough to defeat him, activating the lineage ability called the Roar of the Furious Lion, which made Lu Lai unable to move, and so the narrator begins to scream into the microphone with the activation of that ability. After all, that was the exclusive lineage ability of the Blood Lion tribe, the Roar of the Furious Lion. With it, anyone within a 5-meter radius would be unable to move for almost 2 seconds, truly a quite powerful ability. Zhuang comments that awakening the lineage ability at such a young age was not bad at all, and now he really wanted Blood Claws for himself. Yu then comments that the lion ate too much and would end up bursting from overeating, and Zhuang says that he also ate a lot and mocks Yu because she always saw problems in everything, and therefore never managed to accept any students, to which Yu only thinks to herself that nothing really interested her in the first place. On the battlefield, Blood Claws shows how that was the absolute power of his lineage, and Lu Lai could despair with his future merely being great and pure defeat. Lu Lai dodges and moves away from the blow, but despite that, the lion's attack manages to hit him, scratching his bone leg, which makes him think that it was really bad because Lu Lai had had his arm and leg torn off and broken, thus losing his only advantage, which was his speed. The narrator continues to say that the final match has now definitively been decided, and so it was only a matter of time before competitor Lu Lai finally gave up or died on stage in front of all the people who were watching. Blood Claws continues to mock Lu Lai because he didn't even need to bother giving up, because he didn't intend to let him go even if the match had ended right now. He insists that Lu Lai would die, so he could only choose whether to die right there or outside, so they could only make things easier, and if they did things the easiest way, they could simply end it quickly and allow people to remember it for at least a couple of days, thus throwing the bait so that they could finish that battle one way or another, just waiting for Lu Lai to take it. Blood Claws continues to provoke Lu Lai, asking if they could start this game by breaking his bones, kicking his head, or doing anything even more cliché. As the lion approached slowly, Lu Lai counted his steps, and with only 1 step left, he rose from the ground, slashing towards his opponent. But with a mere slap, Blood Claws sent that arm with the dagger flying away, amused by his failed attempt to survive. But little did he know that this had always been Lu Lai's plan, and then he delivered a violent blow to Blood Claws' back, leaving him in shock as he spat blood before falling heavily to the ground defeated. Everyone watching simply fell silent in such surprise at what they were seeing, and even the rabbit presenters stumbled to say something. And then, the turtle, who hadn't been able to say a single word until then, now says that what they had just witnessed was simply spectacular, because it had been a long time since the last time they saw such an exciting turnaround in a battle. The furious turtle says that the match was part of player Lu Lai's plan, as from the beginning he showed a speed advantage and attacked the strongest with the approach of the weakest. He provoked blood claws, causing him to be irritated from the beginning of the battle, and so, under the explosion of his opponent's anger, Lu Lai constantly pretended to be weak and drew blood claws to use his final move. And then they entered the most exciting part, where they reached the point where the arm and leg that blood claws had severed. In the end, when everyone thought that Lu Lai was undoubtedly doomed, he used a skeleton resurrection, which was an ability that made it possible to be spiritually connected to a fallen skeleton soldier for a certain period of time, and thus he achieved a definitive counter-death to defeat the strongest opponent with his weakest abilities. With that, the furious turtle concludes its narration by saying that that competitor was named Jian Yu. On the ground, Blood Claws continued pleading for help to spare his life, but before Lu Lai could take his opponent's life, Zhuang and Yu interrupt the battle. Zhuang saves Blood Claw's life and sends Lu Lai's character flying away, practically shattering his skeleton body in the process with his power, but Yu interferes and counterattacks Zhuang, delivering an attack that almost kills Zhuang despite tearing a piece of his arm off. Zhuang asks if Yu was crazy to try to attack in that way because that could really have killed him, so if she couldn't give a reasonable explanation for intervening like that, he wouldn't let that matter pass so easily. Holding Lu Lai's skull, Yu says she will make him her personal possession while using her power to rebuild his skull body. Yu continues to say that now things could return to normal, and Lu Lai is surprised because not only were his broken bones healed, but they became even stronger than before. Yu asks where the turtle and that rabbit went because if the results of that battle were not announced at once, she would get angry with them and stab them too. With that, the two announcers quickly appear, and they announce that the winds and clouds have arisen, daring to swallow the sun and the moon because they have just witnessed the emergence of a new star, and it was the participant Jian Yu, and thus they congratulate him for becoming the champion of that tournament of the Storm Cloud Arena. With that, Lu Lai receives the worthy rewards for winning the tournament, and he receives his 5,000 experience points. In addition, he gained the passive ability called Shadow Steps, where he could increase his agility by 20%. In his character profile, he gained the achievement called the Crown of the Storm Cloud Platform, also receiving an epic dagger of level 15 called the Blood-Stained Blade, and Lu Lai realizes that the feeling in his hand with that dagger was really pleasant. The dagger he received had the special ability of converting 10% of damage caused into self-healing, which was impressive because that was a weapon with a vampiric attribute, so it was great for prolonged battles, and thus resilience would be crucial for the upcoming events. After receiving all his rewards, Yu tells Lu Lai that his wounds have been healed, and now that he has received all his rewards, they would begin the Storm Cloud Catastrophe, another event that takes place within the Storm Cloud platform, divided into two parts. The first part being the battle in the arena that would select the champion, and the second part would be triggered afterward. The rules for the catastrophe were that the champion of the Storm Cloud platform would descend into the world of players as a boss for a limited time, and his time limit would always be 1 hour, where his main task would be to ensure his survival, hunt players for as long as possible to gain experience and contribution points. Contribution points could be used in mutual negotiations, exchanging advanced skills and weapons, and could be used to improve one's position and status. Zhuang interrupts the conversation by saying that his quarrel with Yu is not over yet, and he asks how she would dare to openly attack the Lord of the Northern Hall as if declaring war, and asserts that he would report this to the city lord because since Yu took control of resources and finances, she has been very arrogant. Zhuang continues to talk a lot of nonsense about how she was planning to retaliate against him just to have more military resources in her hands and rebel completely, to which Yu also becomes angry, calling him an old man and telling him not to act so shamelessly as to interrupt the storm cloud arena, risking punishment for that action. Yu also starts cursing Zhuang and accuses him of promising the title of champion of the Blood Cloud Arena from the beginning to the old man from the Blood Claw family and always meddling, playing both sides, which made her angry for blaming her as if she had done something wrong. The two continue to argue, and Yu even says that next time he goes out to battle, she would first cut his military salary and then suspend his military provisions, and she wouldn't even send equipment for him to use. Lu Lai lets out a worried sigh that those two might actually start fighting, to which the rabbit and the turtle arrive running, saying that if the two of them fought, half the people in the city would end up suffering the consequences. Lu Lai then says to send him to participate in the next event, to which Yu tells him not to embarrass her in any way, either killing at least 1,000 people or not bothering to come back to face her. After this threat, Lu Lai runs off intimidated towards the portal, where the random achievements manual was activated, detecting that he had reached level 10 and generating a random mission for him to complete. With that, the beginning of the next event started while the random achievement mission was generated, which was to complete Blindness of the Heart of Wu Yu and kill the 1,000 players, needing to do this within the Storm Cloud Catastrophe event, and if he couldn't accomplish that within the time stipulated by the event, the mission would permanently expire. With the event being unlocked for nearby players about the aforementioned limited time event boss to be faced, the system detected through his omniscient bracelet that his level had increased, and with that his character stats were all increased by another 5 points. It doesn't take long for the characters to start trying to attack Lu Lai's character as a boss, but he quickly dodges the first blow while the system notifies him that he had acquired the ability called Hunter's Flail Blade, where he could unleash 4 blows on the target, causing 110%, 120%, 130%, and 150% of physical damage respectively. If the target was killed by this ability, the blows would be maintained and automatically target a random enemy within a 10-meter radius to continue the attack, and as a passive ability of that skill, for each enemy killed by this technique, an additional 150% blow could be added. After analyzing this ability, Lu Lai realizes that as long as he could reduce the health of a large number of enemies and then use the Hunter's Flail Blade technique, he could become a perpetual motion machine, thus gaining a tremendous amount of experience. And so he does, killing 4 players in a single swift move to the point where they couldn't even see the boss properly. Calling for CC, Lu Lai asks her if the other players could see his location, and she agrees, warning that the system would transmit his location to other players in real time, which makes Lu Lai think that from now on things would actually become quite simple. And so his character would continue to work like a true boss, killing dozens of players in sequence as players began to appear, and his count would quickly start to grow. And with that, we practically return to the point from the beginning of this manhwa, where Lu Lai practically cleared almost the entire area of his enemies, so the number and frequency of gathered players were decreasing, and he would need to go to a new location despite leaving hundreds of weapons from the old players on the ground. Still, it was a pity that he couldn't pick up the equipment left behind by the players, and at this moment that character from the beginning of the manhwa even tried to pick up one of the available weapons for himself, but was killed without even realizing it, shocked by it and making Lu Lai realize that Guy talked too much when he should just die already. Those other groups of players that started appearing at the beginning also reveal themselves again here, and soon Lu Lai continues his killing spree, taking the lives of 444 of them, still needing many more deaths for his mission to be completely fulfilled. Still, the talkative one who died in his hands gave Lu Lai an idea, so he sends a message to his brother sending him the coordinates of his location, to which Fei thanks him, thinking Lu Lai was ready to give him some items or weapons, but little did he know what was before him. Suddenly, a player named Luna, at level 18 and capable of defeating epic-level bosses, appears, which was a novelty for him. He then asks CC to collect information about the Moon Knight class, and his assistant quickly does so, allowing him to discover that the class was hidden among swordsmen with balanced attributes. All attacks from the Moon Knight class had both physical and magical attributes, with a low entry requirement but high potential range. Luna feels like she's being watched and realizes someone is nearby. But instead of just Lu Lai, a group of guys appears, having noticed that she had just picked up an epic item. Luna asks if they would like to fight for it, but obviously they deny it because supposedly they just wanted to be friends with her. But it was obvious they wanted to loot whatever they could from her. However, one of them just says they wanted to borrow her equipment for a few days, promising to return it, and if she didn't trust him, they could even exchange information directly through messages. Luna tells them to go ahead if they were really confident about it, but before the men even had the opportunity to search her items, she immediately cuts them down with her starlight. The man left standing there is shocked and afraid of dying, saying he's an important member of the arrogant guild, but Luna completely ignores his words and cuts off his head. Then she notices Lu Lai up in the tree and tells him to come down, to which Lu Lai immediately descends, a bit surprised that she was able to see him and wondering if killing her would be worth it or not, realizing it was too risky. Luna realizes that if they were to fight there like bosses, the guild could come back for revenge, despite the boss seeming quite challenging. The two immediately rush at each other to fight, and at the same time, that guild called Arrogant appears with a huge number of members to avenge Luna after she killed those other 3 players. Luna is surprised because they arrived much faster than expected. But at the same time, another wave of players who were after the boss appears, and they split up to each fight their respective groups of opponents. Lu Lai and Luna run to different sides, causing the boss's pursuers and the Arrogant Guild's group to accidentally collide due to the number of people in the area, so the two groups start fighting each other, creating the most chaotic situation possible. With that, Luna and Lu Lai return a little later to start attacking people quickly, defeating the players one by one in the middle of that huge mess. The chaos of battles happening all at once creates a cloud of dust and smoke, and people couldn't even see each other in the midst of all that chaos, not even realizing if they were hit or not, with some other players realizing they were almost dying. Lu Lai uses his ability to start killing several players in sequence with just one blow, leaving those players shocked at the number of abilities that boss had. After all the groups are quickly dispersed with the players dead, only Lu Lai and Luna remain on the battlefield, and conveniently only one player is left for Lu Lai to complete his mission. The two clash their weapons, and Lu Lai manages to complete his random achievement task, with Luna losing to the boss. In real life, the player Luna with the name Bai was in a hospital sitting in a wheelchair, her full name being Bai Xiaoyu, and a servant informs her that her parents were calling her for dinner, and Xiaoyu says they should let them eat first because she wasn't hungry yet. She begins making some strategy notes about the game Fantasy Moon, marking the profile of that limited time boss she faced, which apparently seemed to have AI and advanced intelligence. Meanwhile, with Lu Lai successfully completing his random achievement of killing 1,000 players, he received random rewards for it, and his generated reward were enchanted divine earrings, being a mythical level item where the wearer of those earrings could transform their own race. After the transformation, they could obtain the specific appearance, passive talent, and language mastery of that race. Lu Lai is surprised because he received a mythical level item, although it was a worthy reward for someone who killed 1,000 players, being an item of great applicability and functionality. The system congratulates him for completing the Storm Cloud catastrophe, also granting him rewards from that event, thus reaching level 21 and acquiring a new ability called Crescent Explosion Blade, where his next basic attack is enhanced, causing 180% physical damage to the target and ignoring 20% of their physical defense. There's a 20% chance of inflicting the bleeding status on the target with this ability as well. After receiving his rewards, Lu Lai returns and receives applause from all the spectators, with the commentators congratulating him for successfully completing the storm cloud catastrophe and achieving the impressive record of killing 1,000 players. Another achievement unlocked for Lu Lai was the Rising Star title of the Storm Cloud, and upon returning, Yu congratulates him for at least not embarrassing her. Yu then tells him to follow her, and the two head to the Blood Moon City, one of the secret realms, to a location called the Evolutionary Blood Pool. Lu Lai doesn't understand where exactly they are, but since the hidden plot began when he entered that game, and with everything that has happened since then, he continues to wonder how all those events were programmed when they weren't even part of the game's planning. Yu asks Lu Lai if he happened to know why Bloodclaw was adjusted to the same level as him, but still managed to crush the other players, and with Lu Lai responding that it was bloodline, she agrees and says that just as equipment had different qualities, the attributes of each monster varied greatly due to differences in bloodline, so Lu Lai's bloodline was the lowest level because he was a skeleton. Lu Lai asks if the place they were in was related to breaking the attributes of the bloodline, and Yu agrees, stating that it was one of the secret realms under her jurisdiction, the secret realm of the blood pool, and now he would enter that blood pool within an area of his choice. His evolution would depend on Lu Lai's luck, and upon seeing the skeleton enter the blood pool, Yu is surprised because the absorption speed was quite fast, and she thinks that his potential was indeed very high. Suddenly, the Black Death Guards from the Lord's mansion of the city appear calling for Yu's name, saying that the city lord had given an order to summon her immediately to the main city, and she tells them that she was busy as they could see and they should just wait until she was free. Still, the guard says that there was a blood summoning decree from the city lord, and after the issuance of the blood summoning decree, the recipient of that summon must immediately present themselves to the city lord, and anyone who disobeys would be executed. With that, Yu begins to leave and tells Lu Lai to be careful not to be accidentally crushed because occasional rock falls occur in the nearby mountains. So the skeleton is left alone in the blood pool when Yu leaves accompanied by the guards to meet with the city lord. Meanwhile, the subcommander of the Shadow Squadron appears ready to lead an attack against Lu Lai, who was still in his evolution process. With Yu accompanying the guards as usual, the guard leading her pondered over what Wu Yu might think she could accomplish, as even facing the blood summons, she needed to come at the same time. Along the way, Yu notices something and sits down to watch, to which the guard asks what she was trying to do, and she just thinks that it was a great spot for a spectator to watch what was about to happen. Meanwhile, all the men attacked Lu Lai at once while he was still in his evolution process, but little did they expect Lu Lai to emerge from there without a scratch and take the lives of those characters in the blink of an eye. They all were shocked by what was happening before their eyes and rushed towards Lu Lai in his new form, realizing they had to advance against him despite the misinformation they had received before. But even while maintaining their coordination, each of those men began to be quickly and cruelly killed with Lu Lai's new abilities after his evolution as an assassin, and as a player, intimidating each of them with his frightening skills and aura. The sub-commander couldn't understand how the information they had received was incorrect because in the end, the man they were facing was ridiculously strong. He was still insisting they should find a way to eliminate him, remembering how they had been ordered as the only ones capable of fulfilling that mission. The Shadow Squadron was the pride of Lord Zhuang Huaishui and the pride of the Northern Moon Hall, so they were the great and sole will of Lord Zhuang. Thus, his honor was in their hands to fulfill that mission. With that in mind, the sub-commander goes after Lu Lai still alone in the hope of being able to cause any damage against his opponent and complete his mission. But despite his efforts to cause any damage to Lu Lai, he skillfully dodges and kills the sub-commander with relative ease, thus finishing the fight. Watching the spectacle, Yu applauds, saying it wasn't bad at all, and he really managed to gain a lot from the storm cloud cataclysm, approaching Lu Lai. He asks if those were Zhuang's personal men, and she confirms that they had tried to kill him, and those who had tried to stop her on the way were all from the same personal group of Zhang Huaishui, and obviously Yu herself dealt with those who had previously tried to stop her as well. Lu Lai comments that she was skilled in falling into their trap on purpose and asks if that was her second test for him, and with the woman blatantly staring at Lu Lai's private parts because he came out completely naked after his evolution in the blood pool, she says she was satisfied with his performance and asks if there was anything he wished her to do because she would grant any wish. Lu Lai says he wanted to ask about a person named Han Yixiao, and she sighs, saying he had left, possibly even died. There's a tense moment between the two until Lu Lai asks what happened, and Yu says that would be the second question, but she could only tell him if he answered her question first. After all, since he heard the name Han Yixiao on the Storm Cloud platform, he had been watching Yu frequently and then planned a whole scheme to introduce himself, drew her attention, and did everything to get close to her, to obtain information about his former disciple. Lu Lai reveals that Yixiao was his older brother, and thus we begin a sad flashback to some year in the past where Lu Lai was in the orphanage with his brothers, and his younger brother Fei was being bullied. Lu Lai was trying to protect his brother while Fei begged the kids to give his rabbit back to him because it was his last memory of his mother, and the bullies just laughed at him while still mocking Lu Lai for trying to be a hero to them. They mock because they were in an orphanage and shouldn't cling to old things when clearly they've lost everything now and were adopted by that place, and so the kid starts tearing the teddy bear in front of Fei. Suddenly, another kid arrives and punches the bully in the head, hitting each of the bullies who were bullying Fei with a broom, making the children practically beg for help as they were beaten. After sending the kids running away, Fei is impressed by how cool the boy was, and Lu Lai asks who he was and why he helped them. He introduces himself as Han Yixiao and says that no matter the tough situation, they should always smile because things would always be resolved as Yixiao would protect them from then on, and no one would ever intimidate them again. Lu Lai explains that Yixiao was his closest family, which makes you remember how she had Yixiao as her disciple, recalling a moment when he asked her to give him common equipment because he had two younger brothers and wanted to save the best for them. With this memory, Yu mentions the infernal purgatory, where on that day the competitor Han Yixiao defeated the King of Knights, Dogyu Dan, successfully defending his title as King of the Storm Cloud with 10 consecutive victories. Within his 10 consecutive victories on the Storm Cloud platform as usual, he entered the Storm Cloud tribulation but never returned. People on the platform commented that 4 hours had passed since the Storm Cloud tribulation ended and wondered if something had happened because theoretically he should have been sent back forcibly. Yu says she searched everywhere for a long time before discovering that the last place he had appeared was called the Infernal Purgatory. Lu Lai asks if knowing about the place she couldn't go there, but she denies, saying she couldn't teleport to that place because there was an unknown force blocking her in that realm, so she couldn't go there. Lu Lai then calls for CC and asks her to search for relevant information about the place called Infernal Purgatory, but the search quickly fails, and he starts searching the database manually, even though his assistant tells him he couldn't do that, and Yu is puzzled by the reason he was murmuring those things. Lu Lai thinks he needs to calm down and think better, where supposedly his brother should be in the Infernal Purgatory, also the time he went offline in the game, and surely that place should have some important answer to his important quest. Delving deeper into the database using his secret and important access, the system begins to try to retrieve the database code from that location and soon warns that the illegal instruction would be forcibly ejected. But even as he tries to open the source code, he is surprised because the source code is being rewritten and Lu Lai is forcibly ejected. Yu says that was all she knew, and if he didn't believe her, he should go find out for himself, and Lu Lai then thinks he really needs to go to the place to find out the truth for himself now. Lu Lai asks Yu to do him another favor and asks how he could go to that other realm, and CC tells him that the method to return to the player world was something she knew.